Hi, everyone. I am Mindy Rivera. I am a parent consultant here at the Utah Parent Center. Just want to take a moment and say thank you for joining us this evening. Um, and I will be the facilitator for this session here. Just like previously, I'm going to give Jeff a 10-minute warning. He'll have 10 minutes to conclude his presentation, and then we will take another 10 minutes to wrap up and announce prize winners. Um, so I just want to take this time now to introduce Jeff Skibitsky. And he is the founder and president of ABS. And that is an organization that provides ABA therapy and diagnostic assessments to children with autism spectrum disorder. He has been in the field of autism and applied behavioral analysis as a clinician and an advocate for over 2 decades. In the past, Jeff served on the Scientific Advisory Board for Pathfinder Solutions, as well as served on the Client Advisory Board for the Behavioral Health of Excellence, or the BHCOE. Jeff is currently serves as a board member for the Utah Parent Center and the Disability Law Center. Jeff is passionate about helping children with autism and their families live their lives. And I just want to take a moment to personally thank you, Jeff. My son goes to ABS, and I know without ABS, we would be a mess right now.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you, Mindy. I appreciate the introduction, and I'm going to be talking more from with a generalist hat today. It will be from my background working with autism, but behavior goes far beyond that. I do know, by the way, since you said gifts do come after this, my daughters had come in right beforehand and let me know that I'm up against Tom Hanks in some concert series being put on by CNN. So I didn't expect to have too many people joining tonight. So I appreciate it. It means it honestly shows how dedicated the parent group, the stakeholder group for families is. And that's really what I want to hit on tonight. Behavioral, you can't look at that through a lens. It takes a team. Not one individual is ever going to come in with a superhero cape on. The days of Super Nanny, for those who remember that show, that person doesn't exist. Somebody doesn't come in and fix the problems. It takes a team to do it. It takes the community. It takes a group of family members, and it takes some professionals at time. And that's really what we're going to be focusing on today, because during COVID, a lot of that's been stripped away. As we talked about the reality shows of Super Nanny, I would imagine everybody on this call who has children could have made a pretty cool reality show of their life during COVID as a educator, as a parent, and as a worker, all out of the same home at the same time. And all the stories that would have come into that, and all of the trials, all of the challenges that would have occurred. And we all have run into behavioral needs. So as we look at that through this lens and start to evaluate what we're going to be talking about tonight, there are things that I'd like everybody to walk away with. One of them is to collaborate and communicate with your team. During this last 6 months, I've had the opportunity to talk to a lot of families, both in the role of helping to support families through community resources, as a clinician, and then as a friend. And what I've really come down to understand is that we all kind of keep things bottled up. We don't often share what's challenging us. We don't often ask for that much help. And it's a flaw of all of us as humans, is that we think that we can do it all. And in order to really create the environment that you're going to be successful with, that your family is going to be successful with, that your child will be successful with, that first step is that collaboration, is that communication with your team. And it's such a pivotal component to finding that path through any behavioral challenge. The next piece that we'll walk away with from this presentation is really understanding what your child's behavioral repertoire is. Behaviors aren't bad things by nature. Everything we do is behavior. Every skill we have is a behavior. Every interaction that we engage in is behavior. So we need to understand what we're capable of and move away from the don't do that, can't do that, and start to empower and find ways to use the skills we have to strengthen all those systems around us. And then the last thing that I'd like to touch on tonight is just some basic tools, tools that kind of span the spectrum of a variety of children. So this might not be a individualized plan for your child or for your family, but these are skills that are going to benefit everybody just by trying to figure out how to manipulate them and use them in your own home. So let's get to that first talking point. So the collaboration, that communication with your team. I think when you look at our overall goal is if you have a school, they're going to have their school goals. If you have a clinical team, they're going to have their clinical goals. As a parent, you have your daily goals for your child. Your child has their own goals. So, what does this mean? How do we evaluate what's really important and how do we evaluate what we're going to work on? So, take that umbrella, look at it as I want to improve the quality of my life. I want to improve that quality of my child's life. So, with that being the umbrella, I pick a couple goals. I think everybody that's joining this presentation tonight has been in an experience where they've put too much on their plate. They've said, you know what, throw it all at me. I'll take on 10, 15 responsibilities, whether that's in their job, whether that's at home, their personal life. That is something that we need to take a step back from. Realize that, I'm probably better at doing 5, 6 things great than 20 things without having the time, the energy, and the support to get there. So when I'm defining these goals, is take it through the lens that as a parent, you are that CEO, you are that leader of your family, and you need to be that filter in helping to determine and decide on what those goals are and what's most important. So how do we get there? Once those goals are decided on, once those key priorities are built, I need to start looking at what I can do. What is my family capable of doing right now? What are the skills that my child can do and is willing and motivated for? And then how do I use that to get back to that overarching goal? That seems like a pretty easy concept, but it's actually hard at times. I went through this with my daughter just recently. My younger daughter was working on really trying to be as honest as possible. Sometimes she would get scared when she thought that she might get in trouble for doing something wrong. So we spoke with her and really just broke it down. She had her goals. She really wants to demonstrate responsibility to be able to have a phone. Well, in order to do that, we have to trust that she's going to use it responsibly. So I need to look at the skills she has. She has the ability to communicate what's important. She has the ability to self-check, to be aware of what's necessary to get there. So we do a check-in. We reinforce when she's able to tell us that she's done something wrong. We reinforce her for being honest and not covering up mistakes because she's capable of identifying those. And that created that honesty from her. So when we're talking about those strategies, those techniques that'll help my child maintain the skills, I used very basic behavior principles. I helped her to find what's motivating, what's reinforcing for her, her long-term goal. Checkbox right there. She knew that she wanted her phone. Then at that point, we were able to say, okay, how are we going to get there? Well, we identified what she can do. It wasn't, I don't want you to lie. It's what can you do at that point? Part of that was, I can tell you I made the mistake. I can admit when I've done something wrong. Well, I'm going to reinforce that. The strategy I'm using is I'm reinforcing. I gave her the skill, I'm reinforcing it regularly. Now it becomes a new behavior. So that's just one example of how do I change that behavior in my own home. But we spoke earlier as, getting there is not a one person ordeal. In my house right now, we have multi generations in my home. If I were the only one working on this with my daughter, she'd only do it with me because I was the only one that was following through. I was the only one reinforcing. And the behavior never would have set in. So I needed to make sure that anything that I was working on, my wife was bought into, the grandparents were bought into, her coaches were bought into. By doing that, we created a team around her to help maintain all of these goals. If I were in a different situation where maybe doing behavioral work wasn't something that I'd been focused on for such a long time through my career, and I didn't know how to work through this, I'd be bringing in different professionals potentially. I'd be bringing in my behavioral team, which could be a behavior analyst, could be a psychologist, could be a social worker. If there happened to be anything that was preventing her that was medical, I'd be talking to my pediatrician. If there was something about the communication or the willingness to socialize, well, speech is there for me. So it's trying to figure out who needs to be a part of this team. So I'm not relying just on myself to come up with all the answers, because I've got a variety of people. And then me as the parent, I'm there to coordinate. I am that final decision maker. So if I see that people are kind of going at it differently, I need to pause, get my team together, and make sure that they're all focused on that number one priority that I'm working on that time. So as a parent, you're not alone, but it doesn't mean your job's easy. Sometimes being able to coordinate and making sure that team members are all focused on that common goal is a challenge. And that's the one thing that a parent needs to be able to be there and advocate, speak up, and make sure that, hey, these goals that we decided on, everybody's going to be supporting right now. So we're all working towards that goal. It gives the consistency that we're needing for that change. So, the overarching theme here is that it is important. And when people are able to effectively communicate, is that you can get to that higher outcome, that higher quality of care, a better prognosis. If I'm able to take each one of these pieces of everybody's skill set, everybody's knowledge base, is that now I've just made my job so much easier. I'm not out researching it. I'm asking the right people, bringing them together to come up with the right plan. So in all walks of life, behavior kind of works the same way. Is that if you can get people focused on the same goals, bring them into the same room, or at least get that communication going, is that I can take the best of all worlds, and that gives me a better chance at success. So in order to do this, we spoke about that first thing. You need the common goal. I was talking with a family on a podcast that we do, just kind of bringing autism into the real world. And we were talking about elopement, which is the wandering or running away from a situation, and trying to figure out, okay, who all is involved in this? Well, it ended up being neighbors. It ended up being police department. It ended up being their behavioral team and the entire family. Everybody needed to sit down and understand the common goal was safety of that child and making sure that if they do wander at all, that they get back to a safe environment, safe person. So that everybody in that particular sphere had a role to play. Their role might be different, and you have to coach around each one of those roles, but the common goal was there and it was communicated. And that was the priority for that particular individual. And that became the focus. Other things fell apart. You know, I wasn't concerned about the other components of their life because this was such an important behavior. This is safety of a child. So whether or not they were back talking or whether or not they ate all their food, that came secondary. We weren't going to really focus on that right now, and we were going to let it slide because right now, that wandering, that elopement needed to be the common goal, needed to be the priority, and everybody's focus needed to be in the same place. So how do you do this? It's nice to look at conceptually. We're all able to kind of pick up a book. There's so many books out there on behavior, on leadership, on how to be able to communicate as a team. But actually being able to implement it's a different story. In order to get everybody on the same page, there's really a handful of things that need to be consistent. One of which is that we need to be taking and recording information on what we're seeing. We don't want to rely on our own subjective interpretation or kind of how we were feeling that day when we were remembering the event. Because I can tell you is that there's been times where I've probably seen the same behavior, and depending on how I felt, is that my child might have gotten a different feeling from me, or how my day was going. They probably got better listening from me on different times. So I need to take that into account and make sure that when I'm recording something, I'm really looking objectively to understand what's happening. What happened that led to that behavior? What did the child get out of that behavior? What reinforced them that made it feel successful for them to engage in it? And then really identifying all those patterns of what is it that is going on day to day. That's what I can tackle. I can't whack a mole every single problem that comes up without analyzing it. But if I know I see a trend, if I know I see something occurring regularly, that gives me a focus to say, okay, let's solve for this. And then we need to define it. As we talked about earlier, one of the big challenges that I think we all have is that we want to tackle so much all the time. Well, by taking a step back and defining a behavior, you're also reprioritizing. You're deciding that this is more important than a different behavior, or that this is now our focus. This is the one thing that we're all after. Okay, so I'm going to define this behavior now and prioritize it so that everybody, when they see this behavior, understands how to respond, understands how to be able to coach, understands the events that are occurring beforehand to create success, so that we all know we're looking right at the same thing. And that's what we're going to be working on at that given time. And then the last thing that you need to know as you're defining everything for your team is, I need to really understand what's happening in that environment. Is it a stressed out home setting right now? Because everybody is kind of stuck in the certain rooms of the home because of COVID, and we can't get out, can't do anything. We're kind of running in that hamster wheel all the time. Or maybe it's a new person came into the environment, or I have not gotten exercise recently. So I need to really define what's going on to be able to make sure that everything I'm doing is replicable, that I'm making the right decision and I can do it again and again and again to create the new behavior. For my daughter with her lying, we were able to sit back, look at the pattern and understand, she wasn't being honest anytime she thought that she was going to get in trouble. Just be honest about the little things that didn't matter. But if she thought there was trouble involved, the story started to spin. So we were able to define that. We were able to say, this is our priority. We were able to move on from there and make sure that anytime we were seeing that, we all identified the same behavior and gave her a chance to be successful. So that's what we're looking at first for communication. We're making sure that everybody's on the same page. We all know what we're going to be looking at, how we're going to be intervening, and that there's no inconsistency. If you have an inconsistent plan, that's going to throw off how your child learns. Now we get to that second step. I need to know what my child's capable of. I need to know how best they respond. And I need to know what interventions are going to lead to more context to that success, more opportunity for them to feel like they've done something good. So, where to start again? We are a team. You've got school members, you've got friends, family, you have caretakers, you have clinicians. Everybody can sit back and be able to really identify what skills your child has in different environments to make sure that we're not asking for something out of them they're not capable of doing. We need to make sure that it's in their repertoire or that we're building that skill if we're going to hold them accountable for it. So when you're creating a treatment plan, understanding where you're at is going to be one of the key components to figure out what you're going to replace that interfering behavior with. If you have a child who's hitting and pulling hair and punching people when they don't get what they want, I need to know, can they communicate? Can they de-escalate? Do they have any of the occupational therapist derived skill sets of being able to self-calm? Can they plan? Where's their executive functioning at? Do they understand how to reason? So I need to be able to look at all these skills so I create the right treatment plan to be able to apply back to the change of that sequence of behaviors. And the goal is that I'm creating more adaptive, successful, useful behaviors in my child's repertoire at times where they typically would be engaging in an inappropriate behavior because that inappropriate behavior historically worked for them. So I need to find a way to be able to interrupt that and help them to use those skills that they already have. One of the, as an aside, one of the really cool things that I've seen through COVID, and I always say is that this is such a horrible pandemic, but there's got to be silver linings. And this is one I've seen. There are a lot of children who we've been working with that I did not know how well they were able to interact if you took away that truly interpersonal social component. So when I'm looking at a web meeting like this, or being able to chat with their friends while playing a video game, where you're taking out that face to face, where you're taking out that interpersonal, real kind of emotional touch component to that relationship, their social skills boomed. So these are skills I didn't realize were really available. So if I now know that, I change my treatment plan. I change the way I'm going to engage to develop new skills by using this sort of way of interacting that they've developed without it being part of the norm. If I know that they can engage better, taking away those barriers of all that social reciprocity of eye contact and touch, I could probably teach them 10 to 20 times more skills and yet still work slowly on giving them the ability to be able to engage back in those social environments. But now they have a larger skill set. So we're always evaluating and understanding and looking at the lens of what skills are in there at any given time and using our team to get there. So this is a component right now that I'm going to talk about that I think goes, and it's a skill set that I think if every parent has and has an understanding of, you've already increased their chance at success at modifying behaviors. And this is for a parent of a child with a disability. This is for a parent of a child who might have social emotional behavioral problems. And it might be for a parent of a child that's neurotypical. But there's these core basics that I think are so fundamental in being able to engage. First thing is The acknowledgement of reinforcement systems. Reinforcement's not just giving things that are pleasurable to somebody. Reinforcement is that I'm changing the environment and I'm giving some form of enticement to encourage use of a behavior going forward, and I'm seeing that behavior change. It's the fact that I'm using this particular toy or this particular experience or activity in a way where I'm motivating the child to use these other skills in their skill set, and I'm routinely seeing it pay off. So the reinforcement would be coming after the behavior in a way that I'm seeing it constantly change what's going on. Whether this is a teenager looking to buy a car and you're talking to them about their grades and you're checking in with them regularly and you see that motivation and you're getting closer and closer to buying that car, and you're going to help out by every positive grade, giving a little bit to that bank. If you're seeing them get better grades with every incremental change that you've given money, you've reinforced that child successfully to start changing their study habits. Very important. And this goes for every single behavior you're looking at. The next piece is extinction. It's not giving value to a behavior that somebody is exhibiting. So if somebody is engaging in a behavior because they want you to allow them to escape a particular demand, um, it could be where every day at my house, I ask my older daughter to help me with the dishes. And every day she learns from constant contact that if I say I have to go do homework right now, that's going to get her out of dishes every single night because I prioritized homework. But now she's learned. So now I need to realize that, hey, I can't reinforce this new learned behavior of telling me I got to do homework and prolonging and delaying when I'm actually doing my homework to a time where I don't want to do my chore. And how do I do that? I need to take away the value of those words of I don't want to do my homework. I need to make it so that won't change how I respond to her. So I can delay. I can say, well, that's great. You still got to do your chore. And then I will help you get right to your homework afterwards. But I'm not giving the value of delaying her access to following through with the demand I gave her. So extinction could be a matter of denying access temporarily, not giving the immediate access, not giving the chance to escape, not giving physical gratification. It could be a variety of different things, but it's making sure that I'm strategically not giving value to something because it's promoting a inappropriate behavior or something that we're trying to change. The next step is punishment procedures. And I think that a lot of parents is that we default to this because it's easy to deliver. And this is basically the telling of somebody to not to do something. You could do this through a timeout. You can do this by taking away privileges. But the idea behind this is that it should be only for times where either the child is making a conscious choice. They have those cognitive skills to make a decision, and yet they're still choosing to engage in the inappropriate behavior. Or you're using it at a time where it's such a dangerous behavior, you need an immediate stop to it. As we talked about earlier, we don't want to get into the don'ts, the can'ts. What we really want to get into is what can we do to replace it and really reinforcing the new way of engaging the environment. The next piece is behavioral contracts, and we touched on that already. It's giving well, if you're able to accomplish this, then I am going to live up to my agreement and follow through with whatever it is that I plan to reinforce with. And it's oftentimes with older children, you can make this as a written contract, similar to a work written contract. I do my job, I have my bonus. If I meet these criterion, I expect that that's going to occur. With a child, you break it down into small little steps. Each step might deliver some payoff on the way up, but you're committed to it. and they're committed to their component of it. There's rules to it. There's reinforcement to it. Sometimes there's punishment to it, but it's really breaking it down. Above all else, though, one of the things that we have to remember is that everything we're asking not only has to be in the repertoire, but it should be a skill that's age appropriate at that time, which oftentimes you got to talk with your team, understand developmentally, what should I expect right now? My 4-year-old is going to have far different responses from me than my 8-year-old because I expect more. It's not unfair. It's the fact that developmentally they're capable of so much more. So I'm going to raise the bar on them. With any of the children that we're working with, we should always know developmentally what is expected. So let's get back to those goals. Let's get back to what we are going to work on in the home environment. When we're looking at priorities, because I wouldn't be picking, like I said, 2 to 3 behaviors is me as a parent right now with my child, trying to work, trying to help them with their school, trying to manage and be their social life because they don't have it on the outside right now because of COVID. I need to really identify what it is I want to work on. When I'm making those prioritizations, is it disrupting the family? Is it preventing the family from accessing different environments? Is it preventing the family from gaining supports, from being able to bring in more support into my home? Is there any chance of harm in this situation? Is there any chance anybody else in my family or any of their friends or any of the other stakeholders are going to be harmed? I need to be looking at it and then breaking those down to identify which are those core behaviors. If I were to pick 2 to 3 and do it really well, how am I going to do that? How am I best going to get there? So when I'm looking at these disruptive behaviors, the harmful behaviors, I need to know what is the most interfering. Can't tackle 5, 6 things at the same time. If I'm going to be consistent, I want to pick a couple and work really hard at it, get everybody on board, and then eventually start taking on more and more challenges. Can't do this alone, though. As much as we all feel like we're superheroes as parents, which right now I would say everybody who's joining this call probably is a superhero because we're navigating through one of the most challenging times in our history with trying to understand a pandemic at the same time as being cut off from a lot of the social supports that we were so used to having because we can't leave our homes. So we need to have supports around us. Family Links provides that. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful resource to have. But how do you access that help? Try and figure that out and list team members to be supportive of whatever program you're putting in. And then identifying from there, where do I work on this? Where is it going to be the safest? How can I start to make those gains? If trying to do this in my home right now isn't the best place, well, maybe I enlist the school for support. Maybe I find a center-based service so that I can start to get those skills built and then move them back into the home. What's the best setting? What's the best environment for me to start working through this right now? And that might also be who. We're all stressed. And I mean, listening to the last presentations, it's really, we have to own the fact that it's okay to be stressed. It's okay to not be at our best all the time. But that also means we need to communicate that and find the supports to be able to help bring what we need to the family, bring what we need to the child so we can continue to build on these goals. So finding the right people, finding the right environment becomes crucial. So we kind of put the framework in place. We went back. Initially, we're just looking at what our team should consist of, how to communicate, how to build off that. Second piece of it is really understanding what are the behaviors I want to do, how to be able to prioritize those behaviors, and what are the basic tenets that I have to have in place, regardless of who my child is, so that I can use it effectively and be consistent on a certain number of behaviors throughout the day. I'm not trying to overwhelm, I'm not trying to do too much. One behavior might be enough for my family. 5 might be better for another family because they have so much support. You need to be able to identify that and be consistent. Identify the behavior, reinforce that behavior, be focused on that behavior, sometimes letting the others slide, even though they're not the ones, they're not great behaviors to have either. They're just not your priority right now. So, what are some common tools? In almost every home, having some form of reinforcement system is going to be supportive. It's going to be helpful. Um, for children that have a difficult time being able to kind of keep their eye on the prize or communicate, having some pictures, having something visual, being that, putting it at front and center so they're constantly reminded of what it is that they're really striving to be able to do becomes important. Um, in the field of behavior analytics, it's that motivating operation. What is it that's driving me to want to make the change? For some people, it's intrinsic. It's I'm doing this because it opens up so much more to my social opportunities, to my life. Um, but for others, it might not be intrinsic, in which case we have to find items, we have to find activities that will enhance their day to day experience and that they have decided are important to them at that moment. And then when we do figure this out, start to limit the access to those so that they're really controlled by the child's behavior. And they start to really understand for this one behavior I'm working on, it's directly tied to me getting to have more and more pleasurable, enjoyable experiences in my life. And the more that we do that pairing of a behavior to the specific reinforcer, and it should be specific, is that the child starts to make the connection. You do that connection again and again, it becomes normal everyday life. That's what we're striving for. Some of the ways that you can bring this reinforcement to life is using schedules. It's being able to kind of really put things together, drawing out the map. Right now, is our lives have been kind of thrown into whack. Any normative schedule that we've had in our houses has kind of been changed. Even if we've repaired it, there's been a time period where there's some consternation to, is this going to be the normal for everyday life for me? And the child's feeling that same thing. But as long as we're able to stick to a system and make it so that the child understands this is what my daily schedule is going to be, it becomes more of a routine. Even if the events change, the system stays the same. And when you're working on long-term goals, especially, having that visual, and we'll kind of go through the idea of calling it the token system right now, but having that visual to help them realize that they're getting closer and closer and closer to that ultimate goal maintains motivation for longer periods of time. You don't want to be stuck having to reinforce every single behavior, every single example of that one behavior trying to change. You don't want to be stuck trying to reinforce that with a specific item or access to a specific television show. You want to be able to gradually expand the number of times that they can do that behavior without having to be reinforced. And that's where tokens come in. They give you the chance to start normalizing so that a child will start doing the behavior more and more frequently without the need for that immediate reinforcement. Another way that you can kind of help that planning process is through the auditory processing of using a timer, helping them to realize that, when this timer goes off, if I have been successful with my behavior, is that's my cue. That's my indicator that, wow, whew, I've been successful. I've done the right thing. And by being able to do that more and more routinely, is that they start to maintain some of these challenging behaviors for longer and longer periods of time, just because we can expand the length of time that the timer is set for. Now, one of the more specific behaviors that I think that a lot of people run into, especially with younger children, but it exists throughout the lifespan, is being able to go from one activity to another. I'm going to call that any form of transition. And when we're talking about identifying transitional stimuli, it's anything that helps the child move from one activity to the next in the absence of behavior, or one activity to the next using their pro-social behaviors. So it's trying to figure out, how am I going to do that? For some children, is that getting on the bus might have been the hardest thing in the world. Going from home to getting on the bus was a disaster every day. But if I was able to reserve a reinforcer for when they were actually walking and they're engaged moving towards the bus, and they have access to it during that time, it made that transition easier and easier. So I was able to delay it to the point that, hey, you get on the bus, now I'm going to give it to you. But initially, as I made sure they had access to it as long as I saw movement. Sometimes we need to have that transitional stimuli. It's hard to go from something that we're enjoying and having fun with and go backwards in our own mindset to something that's not going to be enjoyable, something that's challenging. So how do we do that? We introduce something into that chain of events that's going to distract, that's going to engage, and that's going to help them to get to the next step, even though they're giving up something in the process. And that's the way to do that, is really identifying what we call competing reinforcers, but things that will compete against those very pleasurable activities. Sometimes it's this high value items. We had a child that was a young adult that had a hard time going to the bathroom to take a shower in the evening. Talked to his parents, said, maybe what we need to do is that this young adult has a very difficult time, but they love their popsicles. They love sweets. So how can we use these sweets to help them realize that going to the restroom to go through their daily evening routine is something that they don't have to fear? It doesn't have to be a bad event. Well, let's start allowing them to carry the popsicle with them to the bathroom, and then they can eat it once they're in there. Now they've moved away from the TV. They've moved away from this fun activity. We use something that was very valuable to them in the form of a popsicle. And now we got them back into this neutral setting of the restroom. So then we could reinforce them going through their tasks in the restroom to get back to that original reinforcer, which to them was their evening television show. But we use the competing reinforcer to break up the routine, serve as a distraction to be able to get to what we really wanted. And then the last thing that I wanted just to kind of work through is the idea of using functional communication. And oftentimes we think of this as only for children who are nonverbal. Fact is that a lot of us have challenges using appropriate words when we're aggravated, when we're overly excited, when we're frustrated about something. Having the chance for a child to be able to utilize a different form of language that might be easier for them, which at times could be the picture supports, helps them to plan. This isn't for all children, but for those that are more visually oriented, giving them a chance to take a step back from verbal communication when already angry, when already frustrated, and give them an easier form of communication helps to get to that end goal of being able to contract, reinforce, and use competing reinforcement to get to what we want, to get to that new behavior that then we can ultimately celebrate. Some of these are pictures, text, symbols, different colors, transitional sort of things, but it's using that visual cueing to be able to get there. So I wanted just to quickly go over and just talk through some of the final thoughts from this evening. I didn't want to go into a lot of specifics as far as techniques, only because we're at a time where, if we can get the foundations down, if we understand those core components, oftentimes is that we're going to be able to navigate through a problem. When the problem is really big, you're going to have specialists that are in there to help support, to guide on specifics, and to really hone in and be a part of that overall team that you're building. But generally speaking, is that these day-to-day problems, can be alleviated to some extent just with those core pieces of being able to reinforce, being able to make sure that you're not reinforcing inappropriate behaviors inadvertently, by being able to slow down the processing and contract, utilizing systems to help build decision making tools so that you can delay that reinforcement and help a child plan through events. But you're not on your own. That's the biggest thing I've learned, especially during the last year, is that if you ever feel like you're trying to do it alone, it's going to be very hard to be successful. Is bring in a team, even talking through ideas, even if it's not one you agree with, will probably promote a better idea in the long term. And then parenting a child with special needs is difficult. And every single person that probably has joined this call that is either working with somebody with special needs or is a parent of somebody with special needs, even by being here, you're doing a great job. By getting through the day to day right now in this very challenging time, you're succeeding. And you need to give yourself that pat on the back. You need to give yourself the reinforcement to know that, hey, I'm successful. I might not be doing everything I want because we all have very high goals, but I'm doing well enough right now that I deserve to be recognized. And then the last thing is just knowing that there's a lot of free resources out there. For behavioral work, a lot of it's paid for through insurance, and there are deductibles and copays, but there's been a lot of legislation, advocacy by probably people on this call tonight that have pushed through to make sure that this care should be accessible. There's also resource groups, family groups, support groups. There's a lot of ways to be able to build your team. And that's the first step, is to be able to identify how to be able to get there, build your team so you can be successful through the process. And I just put in here is that we at ABS, we're doing an autism weekly podcast, just putting services in the real world or just autism in the real world and helping to kind of identify, what's out there. What are people doing? What does daily life look like? But what are some of the resources available? So you can definitely go and check out that podcast that we do that might talk about service animals. It might talk about how to be able to engage your police department. It might talk about how to be an advocate for your parent, for your child. But other things that are out there and available are components like the Utah Parent Center, Utah Family Voices. You're obviously at the conference tonight for the Family Links. But there's ways to be able to create that opportunity and to be able to guide through it so that you're never on an island by yourself.